about black participation?
Well, what we assign committees, we have several people to be working on a committee, that we will have another meeting in Birmingham Saturday, that we'll be discussing some of these issues, some of our strategy, and ways that we'll be able to attract more minorities into the party. We feel like the Republican Party at this point have a golden opportunity to really attract minorities into that party, into the party structure.
What was some of that strategy? Did you discuss any, or is that still in the making right now?
Well, our organization passed a resolution to support Jack Crittenden, which is locally here for U.S. Marshal, and we feel like this will have some impact and some help for us.
Okay, are you surprised at all? How many members, minority members, do you have in the party, first of all, or approximately?
Statewide, I don't have a complete figure on statewide how many members we have today.
Roses are red, violets, they're blue. Today is a special day to say, I love you. Cupid aimed his arrow to sweethearts far and wide. Some received sentimental gifts and were pleasantly surprised. Some received the treasured carnations, red and white. Chocolate candy goes to other sweethearts later tonight. Some got unique gifts for all to see, while last-minute lovers pick that special card for that special baby. Valentine's Day, like Christmas, comes once a year. It's filled with good times and good cheer. And here's wishing a happy Valentine's Day greeting from us to you. I'm Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
Showed up out here, and I believe that they know that cystic fibrosis is a #1 killer of children in Alabama, and there's 200,000 people in Alabama that carry the cystic fibrosis gene, and I think they're out here to help see that we can find a cure for cystic fibrosis.
I'm afraid that Ms. Anthony would find that the coin is basically stored in the vaults of the Federal Reserve and in the vaults of the banks. The acceptance of it has not been that great at this point in time.
Why is that?
The size of the silver dollar coin, as you can see, versus the size of the quarter is basically the same, and I think this has created some confusion in the mind of the public as to whether they really have a dollar or do they have a quarter. And therefore, I think this has been the primary cause of reluctance on the part of the public to accept the coin.
Closed. Make your motion. All right, there's a motion that we suspend the rules and vote.
Back in 1928, when Hoover was...
Make your motion. All right, there's...
The Party is alive and well.
I've sensed in the last few days and few weeks and in this meeting today more excitement about the future of the Democratic Party than I have in a long time. Don't misinterpret what you saw here today. This, in a lot of ways, is a typical Democratic meeting. Democrats traditionally have done that. They fight each other like the Dickens. But then when the fight is over, and we resolve our differences and put the shoulder to the wheel and concentrate on beating Republicans in 1982, and that's what we're going to do.
They say they're going to try to get even more.
Bale says he's pleased with the selection of Knight as his replacement. The former state party chairman says he's now looking forward to being less active.
Jimmy Knight's been a long-time worker and friend, and I think he is a great loyal Democrat. I'm sure he's got the youth and the energy that it takes to help organize on the grassroots level. We've got to get back to basics, as I've said. I think he'll do a wonderful job.
The party's new chairman, Jimmy Knight, says one of his top priorities is to have a Democrat defeat Republican Albert Lee Smith, who holds the 6th congressional district seat, which is Jefferson County.
I also think that the prospects are good for the Democratic Party maintaining its dominant posture in Alabama politics. You know, we have 35 state senators that are elected as Democrats, 101 state representatives. Many counties have all the office holders in the county are Democratic. So I'm really excited about the prospects for the future.
Knight is just as optimistic for the future of the Democratic Party in national politics. He says President Ronald Reagan will spoil it for the Republicans.
First place, I don't believe they have any momentum going, and what momentum they might have had, I think the Reagan administration will effectively kill that by removing the controls on oil prices and gasoline prices going out the roof, and removing controls on natural gas prices, making it difficult for people to heat their homes, and tinkering with Social Security. So I'm not sure that they have any momentum.
Jane Matheson, WSFA, TV News.
Oh, of course I regret he left, because it left a big hole in our sprint group, but I think Stanley is doing what he wanted to do. He's running usually twice a week. He's running well, and there's no doubt in my mind that he is a great sprinter, and I don't wish him anything bad, because I know he can run well. I just wish he would have done his running for us for 3 more years.
The Singing Valentines are an upbeat approach to help fight the grim battle against cancer. Local organizations, including barbershop quartets, school, youth, and adult groups, and the Girl Scouts, all volunteered their vocal talents.
The person who has sent the Valentine sends the personal message. We write it on a Valentine, and it is given to them. And also, we either give them a big lollipop that says, "Let's lick cancer in your lifetime," or a flower, whichever's been selected.
How have the recipients of the Singing Valentines responded?
It's quite a surprise. They have really, let me tell you the funniest one. They delivered one to a butcher on one of the grocery stores on the Southern Bypass, and he was quite surprised when they approached the meat market and said, "We have a Singing Valentine for you," and broke into a chorus, and it drew a crowd, and it was wonderful.
Organizers say the Singing Valentine fundraiser is new to Montgomery, but has been successfully held in other cities. The 150 love messages delivered today raised $1,500 to help fight cancer.
Let me call you sweetheart, I'm in love with...
Jane Matheson, WSFA, TV News.
This weekend and next weekend, we'll be talking with the finance director about a number of subjects. Tonight, we begin with one of the most controversial issues on Capitol Hill this year, on earmarking.
Earmarking is a broad term that speaks to the fact that when a lot of taxes over the past decades were passed, the legislation that created the tax also specified that the revenues from the tax would go into a certain fund. Now, we think of earmarking principally of educational taxes, but we have taxes earmarked for many things. Mental Health Trust Fund has some taxes that are earmarked to it. The system is archaic. No other state does it like we do. And the reason you need to get rid of earmarking is that with earmarking, the amount of revenue that comes into a fund decides how large that program is generally. In other words, you can't prioritize needs of the state. You have to let the way the money comes in and is earmarked set the level of funding and therefore the priority of program.
Of course, last year the governor tried to get unearmarking through the legislature, and the lawmakers kicked it back. What makes him think he can get it through this year?
Well, I think he has a better chance. I think more and more legislators are understanding that what earmarking really does is take an option away from them. The Constitution, read in the code, puts the appropriating process as an obligation and right of the legislature. But earmarked monies are in effect an appropriation that was made years ago. When you say all the sales tax shall go to education, then there's no legislative prerogative in that. It shall all go to education. The same legislators who defend earmarking ought to be insulted by earmarking, because earmarking in effect says, hey, legislator, we don't think you have enough sense, ability, or integrity to use tax revenues properly and to meet priorities as they should be set.
Tomorrow night we'll talk with the finance director about Alabama's financial crisis. Skip Haley, WSFA TV News. Last night we talked with Mr. McDonnell about unearmarking, which Governor James says has a lot to do with Alabama's financial crisis. Tonight we talk about that crisis. In his State of the State address, the governor said that the financial crisis is a myth. And I think you said that the answer is not more taxes, but better use of what's already there. Would you go into that a little bit and explain that?
Well, it has much to do with earmarking. We have a desperate and dangerous problem in prisons. Factually speaking, if we don't build some prison facilities soon in this state, we're going to have to reduce our prison population drastically. And let me tell you that we are already, we have reduced that prison population already by letting the minor criminals out. All that's left in our penitentiaries are the hardened, violent crime criminals. So when we start letting them out, we're not going to be letting the counterfeiters and the shoplifters out. It's going to be the murderers and the rapists. So we have a problem there. But we think if we were to take all of the state's money and put it in one pile, that we would have enough money to meet all of the legitimate needs of state government, including, as my example, the prison problem.
And that with the existing money that's available?
Yes. But we can't use that money for prisons. We can't use money in the general fund for prisons. But in the general fund, we have to pay for Medicaid, which eats up almost a third of it. We have to pay for mental health. We have to pay for all of the general agencies of state government, public health, and so forth.
Next weekend, we'll talk with the finance director about proration and higher education. Skip Haley, WSFA TV News.
Wallace told the group that one of his first priorities when he became governor in 1963 was to improve working conditions for not only state employees, but all hourly workers in the state. In accepting a special plaque from the association, the former governor reminisced about his first job with the state as a dump truck driver, earning 30 cents an hour. During his 3 terms as governor, Wallace initiated a 40-hour work week, increased salaries, retirement benefits, and holidays, as well as improvements in unemployment and workmen's compensation, all of which association members now say are slated for reductions by Governor Bob James. Wallace had no comment concerning the proposed reductions, but in his closing comments told the group, quote, "You've been the most dedicated employees of any state in the Union." Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
Works not only with the state, but otherwise. Therefore, I'm very appreciative of the fact that
Felt pretty good, you know. I just really wanted to win. I wasn't really concerned about the time.
You like this track, don't you?
Well, I like the sport track. Mr. Rutland, the starter here, does a real good job, and I always look forward to him because he holds us up, you know, as long as he's supposed to. He's not a quick starter. He waits till everyone get ready, and I like that because I kind of react pretty good.
It's fantastic. I love it. I run pretty fast today.
You set the meet record last night. Do you think you had a chance at bettering it today?
Yeah, I thought so too, but I'm kind of tired from yesterday.
You look like you're out of breath.
Yeah, I'm out of breath, yeah.
Come on over here, Lauren. Come on over here, Lauren. Is that Miller? Lawrence Thomas.
But that's about my best time this year.
What'd you think of the race?
It was real fast and good.
Environmental Protection Agency officials completed their preliminary testing and finished taking background samples from the tenured Branch Creek today. Tomorrow, EPA officials will make public a complete report on the results of their findings, as well as present a plan on how to clean up the contaminated swamp. EPA officials say the first phase of the testing is already complete, but they didn't want to release the results until all testing is finished, nor speculate on the level of contamination. Tomorrow, EPA workers will begin putting in a treatment system to remove the oil in the small creek. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News, Greenville.
Oh, you mean the tab?
Finney told Rotarians of the state's efforts to bring new industries to Alabama. The Development Office's sales pitch to prospective industries includes this film, which highlights Alabama's energy resources and industrial development training programs. Some points the film lists as attractions are controversial issues now before the state legislature. Issues such as the availability of tax-exempt bonds to help businesses build plants. There's a movement to keep retailers from using such bonds. And the film brags that Alabama spends a larger portion of its revenue on education than any other state. The governor has said that disproportionate funding, especially of higher education, is one reason the state's education trust fund is in such difficulty now. Nevertheless, those points are included in the film the Alabama Development Office shows around the world. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News.
Can you elaborate on the...
We don't know at this time whether or not the accident is intentional. We believe it was. Investigation has revealed that the entire incident arose out of a domestic argument between two individuals, and following the traffic accident. Okay? The victim's name is that it was.
Could you elaborate on the domestic problem?
Apparently it involves a divorce.
There are 11 tax sources feeding the billion-dollar Special Education Trust Fund. That billion-dollar budget then finances all of the state's public education from kindergarten through 12th grade in the 127 local school systems, the 22 junior and community colleges, the 29 technical and trade colleges, to the 14 senior four-year universities. The two largest taxes feeding the trust fund are income tax, taken from your paycheck, and sales tax, paid each time you buy some commercial product. During the last 7 or 8 years, the economy has been doing well. Your paychecks grew, inflation was moderate, and state tax revenues grew at a good rate. In the 1977-78 fiscal year, the trust fund was in good shape. It began the year with almost $75 million left over from the previous year. The legislature drew up an education budget of $999 million. The taxes met the growth expectations, and at the end of the year, there was almost $65 million left over. It was carried over to the following year when the legislature passed a record billion-dollar education budget, anticipating at least a 13.5% growth in the trust fund taxes. The legislature promised education just more than $1.2 billion. But then the economy really began to falter. Interest rates rose, paychecks leveled off, spending dwindled, and taxes didn't grow as expected. Since the state has a law preventing it from spending more than it brings in, Governor James was forced to tell educators that they would get 2.98% less than the legislature had promised, his declaration of proration. Still, the education budget totaled $1,185 million, almost $200 million more than the previous year, but there was no unspent money. So in the 1979-80 fiscal year, the legislature started with a zero balance. But still optimistic about the economy, the legislature passed a $1.25 billion education budget, an 11.5% increase. Again, the national economy affected the growth of income and sales taxes, and Governor James had to tell the educators that the legislature had over-appropriated by 6.14%. But again, even after this proration, the trust fund was $10 million higher than the year before. Including a one-time $11 million surplus the legislature forced itself to keep to begin the next year, and that brings us to the present. The legislature, still optimistic about taxes, approved a budget of just more than $1,380 million for schools to operate with this year. But by January, with 9 months to go in this fiscal year, it became apparent the legislature had again hoped for too much. Governor James declared 10% proration. But once more, the trust fund will be $100 million larger if proration doesn't increase, and in all likelihood it won't. Beginning next year with a zero balance, the current growth projections for the trust fund is 5%, and if Governor James makes a recommendation counting on that growth, he'd be recommending a budget of some $1,320 million. That's about $50 million more than this year, after proration. Obviously, the legislature would like to clear its record of prorated education budgets, but Alabama is no stranger to the problem. In the late 50s, Alabama had 5 consecutive years of proration. Under the direction of Governor Big Jim Folsom, Alabama's education budget lived with 2.6% proration, 7.8% proration, 3.5% proration, continued the next year under Governor John Patterson with 8.3% proration, and the following year with a whopping 14.13% proration. Our graph points out that education has received funding increases from year to year. but it also shows that the growth hasn't matched inflation. It has reached the point, some legislators say, to either cut some of the programs so others can keep up with inflation or fund what little increases there may be to the many institutions that now exist. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Department of Pensions and Security Commissioner Gary Cooper outlined several problems in his department, like welfare fraud and the lack of work incentive. He also listed some improvements he hopes to implement, like redesigning the welfare program to provide work incentive and allowing welfare recipients to evaluate the Pensions and Security Department. After Cooper and the other panelists spoke, members of the audience had an opportunity to ask questions. One person asked about the recent cutbacks at Pensions and Securities because a $6 million conditional appropriation was not available.
We have cut back on out-of-state travel. We have stopped the purchase of many supplies. We have removed the unborn. And for those of you who may not understand it, if you raise your hand, I'll explain it. We've removed the unborn from the ADC, from the caseload, which means that women don't receive welfare payments until after a child is born. That saves us for the rest of the year about $400,000. We have had a hiring freeze, which will save us about $1 million.
Cooper says the department is still $3 million short. He says the state's board of directors will meet Friday to determine how many employees will need to be laid off and what amount of payments to the elderly and children must be decreased in order to stay within budget. He says the state's payments are already the lowest in the nation, but says the cuts, unfortunately, are unavoidable. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
Governor James pointed out to the legislators in a number of ways that Alabama's retirement program does more than any other state. It provides its employees with a retirement check larger than the pay an employee drew while working. And James pointed out that this is a result of Social Security benefits coupled with what he called a generous state program. His proposal would reduce the state program so that upon retirement, an employee would be getting no less, but also no more than his final check. The governor told the legislature that doing this would save the state more than $100 million the first year and as much as $1 billion in the next decade. But the key to controversy in the governor's plan appears to center around the current system. The governor's proposal would put all state employees onto the new reduced program, but would count all of the pension benefits accumulated into the current system. This amounts to cutting current employee benefits. Another plan would set up the new system for all new employees and allow current employees to either stay on the current system or switch over. But Governor James says this wouldn't do anything to save money in the next 3 to 5 years, and saving money is what the governor wants to do. He says the current plan amounts to thievery and is unfair to the taxpayer and to the state employees. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Governor James' proposal to reduce retirement benefits for present state employees didn't meet much optimism among legislators. Several representatives and senators say they agree that escalating retirement costs should be challenged, but they seem to support less drastic measures.
I doubt if we're going to have a new retirement system that will affect the existing employees. Now, I think we should and possibly will come forward with a retirement system that would go into effect October 1 of '81 for future employees, future teachers, and everybody that were to come on board in the future. But to take away benefits is going to be extremely hard to do, and I don't anticipate the legislature doing that.
So I would have to think about that a long time, but I think I could certainly be in favor at this time of changing the system for future employees.
Look, everything you try to do, 2 + 2 = 4, there's opposition. Let's face it, some of these guys are paid lock, stock, and barrel, evidently. How can you argue with those figures? You saw them. Let me talk to you as private citizens. You got a retirement plan like this? Anybody here? You ever heard of anything like this? How do you feel about it? It make you a little bit angry?
The governor says he'll do everything in his power to let the taxpayers of Alabama know that they are, in his words, being raked by the state's retirement systems. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Responsibility by saying, well, this group wants that, and this group wants that, and this group wants that, so we just won't have any of them. We're not complete. The buildings are not ready. So it was really living attitude. We have been in everything and wanted to do that. We have constantly worked. 1893. Howard University publishes a book called Fire. As long as that person at first, John Franklin's biography, hardback. It's the first book in that series. And Dr. Franklin said,
EPA officials say the report shows that the first round of soil testing has confirmed that there is PCB contamination in and outside Tanyard Branch Swamp. The report also shows that inside the swamp the contamination level is high, but outside the report shows low levels of contamination were found. EPA officials say the highest contamination level found inside the swamp registered 130 parts per million. Workers installed a filtering system to further contain the contaminated PCBs in the swamp as part of Phase 2 of their testing operation to determine just how far the chemical may have spread. EPA workers continue taking samples from the Tanyard Branch Creek, which empties into the Persimmon Creek, and from the Mowbray Engineering Company. They'll also take samples from fish and sediment in the area. Results from those samples will be known next week and will help decide what type of cleanup operation is needed or feasible, or whether to simply contain the PCB contamination. EPA official George Moen says there's no imminent danger to residents outside the swamp area.
The type that we found in the swamp, I wouldn't advise anybody to go in there and play or walk around in the swamp, but other than that, I don't see any particular danger.
Officials say the total cost of the testing operation, which could go as high as $200,000, will depend on the final testing results, which come in next week. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News, Greenville.
Pickens County when you were a boy?
Well, that's such an editorial. I didn't see that.
Sonny Callahan come up with some legislation saying that no appropriations shall be made.
I'm not going to say
We'll get underway. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Bailey?
Here.
Senator Barron?
Please.
With the Alabama Trade Committee, we requested the public hearing in
44. Is there any discussion by the committee on Senate Bill?
Now, actually, the credit certified interest an account for the supervision, only for the supervision. Mr. Chairman, let me just state that this was
All such excess fees have not reverted to the general fund at the end of the past fiscal year. There will be no actual decrease in receipts to the general fund.
Mayor, I have here a key to the city of Bogota, Colombia, and it's in they return to us. And I have a copy of that proclamation here, both. Prior to that were taken in Bogota, Colombia, that represent that presentation.
Federal grants financing the Montgomery Area Transit Authority must always be applied for 1 year in advance, and the authority must approximate the amount of money it will need for that year. Now it's been determined that the authority needs $30,615 more than it anticipated last year, so the council has given Mayor Farmer permission to request the additional funding to cover the rest of the fiscal year. City officials say that asking for the additional funds isn't unusual because it's difficult for the Transit Authority to predict in advance how much money it will need. The council also gave the mayor authority to apply for another federal grant, this time under the National Ride-Sharing Discretionary Program. ESCO still has asked the city to apply for an interest-free federal loan that will enable the company to buy 15 passenger vans to carry employees in Elmore and Autauga County to and from work. The loan for the vans will be paid back by the employees who use them. Mayor Farmer says the project shows careful planning, will save ESCO workers money and gas, and get them to work on time. The mayor says he hopes other area companies will follow ESCO's example. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
The Tenured Branch Swamp in Greenville, Alabama was found by EPA officials to be highly contaminated with PCB, a known cancer-causing chemical. Officials say inside the swamp, 130 parts per million of PCBs, the highest level of contamination was found, but outside only relatively low levels of PCBs were discovered. EPA officials say such small contamination levels probably won't endanger the lives of local residents. But what about Alabamians? Is there a chance of a major hazardous waste disposal discovery like the one at Love Canal in New York? State Division Director of Solid and Hazardous Waste, Alfred Chipley, says probably not, because recent waste controls and federal laws forbid unlawful waste disposal. Chipley says the only major chemical site in Alabama is in Sumter County, the Chemical Waste Management Company. The future of hazardous waste disposal, Chipley says there's no major cause for Alabama citizens to worry.
We have found ourselves 100 or more sites. We think we are aware of all the major ones, and none of these have presented any real danger to the public health.
Kim Davis, WSFA TV News. Mrs. Shaw greeted her minister and a group of friends waiting outside Circuit Judge William Gordon's office before they all went down the hall to the courtroom. Once inside, Mrs. Shaw's attorney asked Judge Gordon for a minimum sentence of less than 1 year in addition to probation. Mrs. Shaw's attorney asked the court to consider that Mrs. Shaw has to care for her sick 76-year-old mother. He also pointed out Mrs. Shaw had served the state for 36 years with no other mark on her record. And he pointed out that during Mrs. Shaw's state employment, she didn't take nor ask for comp time for the overtime she worked.
Her attorney also quoted the district attorney as saying Mrs. Shaw had testified honestly and candidly when she was subpoenaed as a witness. Mrs. Shaw didn't get the minimum sentence she requested. When asked if she felt her sentence was fair, Mrs. Shaw asked her attorney if she should answer. He said no. Jane Matheson, WSFA, TV News.
Commissioner Cooper met with the county directors for about an hour. Most of that time was spent trying to answer questions concerning staff layoffs and cuts in services announced 2 weeks ago. During the discussion, Dallas County Welfare Director Terry Benton brought to the commissioner's attention a $2.6 million loan the department made to the State Civil Defense Department. The loan, which was made in 1979 during the Hurricane Frederick disaster in the form of man-hours rather than money, has not been repaid. Commissioner Cooper says the fact the loan hasn't been repaid is one of the reasons his department is suffering from money problems. He urged the county directors to meet with their local legislators in an effort to have a bill introduced that would call for repayment of the loan. Commissioner Cooper also told the group he's absolutely opposed to the staff cuts, but says the department has no choice. The directors say with the proposed cuts, they cannot possibly continue to provide adequate services. The Pensions and Security Board meets Friday to make its final decisions concerning the exact number of employees to be terminated and the number of services to be cut or totally discontinued. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
Passed out of committee were 9 bills designed to set up an authority that could sell up to $90 million in bonds. The money would upgrade facilities for the mentally ill and the mentally retarded. Senator Sonny Callahan is one of the most vigorous supporters of the bond issue. He says the improvements would make the state eligible for $20 million a year in federal Medicaid funds. That money would go to retire the debt on the bond issue. Some senators expressed fear that the federal government will eliminate or at least decrease Medicaid funds. Callahan says that possibility is remote, but he'll vote for increased taxes if necessary. Before voting on the issue, several senators pointed out that the bond issue would require earmarked funds to pay for the debt. That was an apparent message to the governor, who supports the bond issue but wants to unearmark all state income. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
The bill is sponsored by Representative Joe Carruthers of Dothan, who, along with the Municipal Electric Association, claims his proposal to allow the municipal systems in the state to incorporate and join Alabama Power in its electric generation projects will result in lower rates for both sets of customers. But the power company doesn't agree, saying the creation of the municipal authority would benefit the municipal system customers at the expense of the Alabama Power Company customers. The power company claims their customers would be further discriminated against by allowing the proposed authority tax-free status and complete freedom from the Public Service Commission regulation. Alabama Power is also concerned that its territorial rights, as well as those of the municipal systems and rural electric cooperatives, aren't addressed. The power company says this issue has to be resolved before any joint generation bill is considered, but the bill's sponsor, Joe Carruthers, says the territories can be defined later. After 5 attempts to alter the bill to repeal the tax-free status to bringing the authority under partial or complete PSC control, the committee quickly adjourned, leaving the bill untouched and open for consideration at tomorrow morning's meeting. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
I don't look back on that decision with any regrets because I will be graduating in May, and that was a central part of my decision. And, you know, we are in the district title, in contention for the district title, and you know, all these things are coming together, and we're just trying now to play the best ball we can. We've been playing much better as a team, and I don't look back on our decision with any regrets at all.
Sure you can. Hey, look, you know, I mean, when I was at Auburn High School, they said you couldn't win in the city, and I said as long as they don't line up more than 5, you can win in Montgomery, and we did. You know, belief is all it takes. Whoever thought David would be the victorious one, you know, and I believe that, and nobody can take that belief, you know, away from me or those guys.
You gonna slow the game down?
Sure I am. I'm gonna do whatever it takes, you know, to help our team have a better chance to win. We've got good players. Those last 7 we got are good players. I mean, you know, they were selected by us just like those 6 that are suspended. And there's no indispensable guy. Hey, Larry Chapman's not indispensable. Those 6 guys are not indispensable. And all I know is this. Hey, man, the sun came up today. It's going to come up tomorrow. And I think that that's the key to those 6 guys. What are they going to do with their life, you know, in view of what's happened?
Auburn's top 3-point getters on the year again provided the scoring punch tonight. Angie Hanna paced the Lady Tigers with 26 points, a season high. Her previous best was 24. Auburn's Becky Jackson exploded for 16 points in the second half and totaled 18 on the night. Lori Monroe, averaging 11 going in, came away with 16 as Auburn cleared the 90-point mark for the third time this year. Several team records were set in the win over the state women. Lady Tigers' 33-point victory margin was the largest this season. Auburn's 51 points in the first half set a new mark for Coach Joe Champy's team, and the Lady Tigers' 29 rebounds before intermission set a new team record. Auburn's Hannah, Jackson, and Martha Monk are legitimate All-America candidates. Hannah and Jackson for their scoring and board work, Monk for her incredible assist total. The Lady Tiger guard had 261 assists going into the game with Alabama State. No other member of the team had more than 95. Coach Champy didn't let up tonight, perhaps remembering how South Carolina scored 58 points in the second half to beat the Auburn women just 2 nights ago. Or perhaps Champy was thinking about the Lady Tigers' next opponent, Georgia, a team that has averaged 106 points over the last 4 games. Auburn an easy winner tonight at C.J. Dunn Arena, 99-66. Dave Cody, WSFA TV Sports.
The marchers peacefully sang and chanted as they walked from the Alabama State campus to the Capitol. Once gathered on the Capitol steps, the protest grew more emotional. One student speaker said losing ASU is an insult to every existing black, and that they shouldn't allow the governor and the Commission on Higher Education to take over the black heritage. County Commissioner John Knight commended the crowd on a job well done and added he totally supports the protest. Media Representative Al Dixon admonished the local media for giving the Ku Klux Klan activities more coverage than today's rally. The emotional high point was an address by Southern Christian Leadership Conference President John Nettles.
Integration to white folk means forget about your black heritage and move whiteward. That's right. But integration is a move from all things wrong to all things right. And it's right for Alabama State University to be the prevailing institution over them other little nitwit colleges.
As the rally broke up, the group left saying they'd march again if necessary. Jane Matheson, WSFA TV News.
Attorneys for Joyset say they're filing this suit because the state of Alabama has failed to provide appropriate educational placement for her and others like her. They say this failure violates her constitutional rights.
The law, both federal statute and state law as well, guarantees to handicapped children the same appropriate education. Now, for some kids, that means just a classroom, and for others, it may mean institutionalization. Our suit is about people who fall in between that, people for whom the appropriate special education placement is a community-based residential facility.
If you have the children at home inappropriately, you have all kinds of disruptions in the school system. You have bringing children to juvenile court because they're getting into trouble at school or not being at school, not learning appropriately, maybe dropping out and committing crime in the community. If you have the children in an institution inappropriately, well, institutions are very, very expensive, far more expensive than the kinds of placements we're talking about.
Joyset's attorneys say if they win, the state agencies named in the suit would be forced to fulfill their responsibilities. The amount of money that would be involved in setting up new facilities for in-betweens is anybody's guess, but most likely it would be a large amount. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
At a news conference, Dr. Hubbard referred to the unearmarking bill as an anti-education piece of legislation because he says it zeroes in specifically on funds for public schools, leaving earmarking in other selected areas. He says county funds, municipal funds, debt service, agriculture and industries, and Medicaid will continue being 100% earmarked. Hubbard adds that the Pensions and Security Fund, the General Fund, the Highway Department, and the health funds will all continue to be earmarked under the bill. Hubbard says with some departments retaining 100% of earmarked funds and the Special Education Trust Fund reduced to zero, the result will be increased class size, short classroom supplies, continued low teacher salaries, and what he calls restraints in other areas necessary for achieving quality education. Hubbard says the reason Governor James wants education unearmarked is so he can put more money into the state's prison system, because he says the governor is under pressure from a federal judge to alleviate overcrowding in the prisons. Asked if he thinks the bill will pass in the legislature, Hubbard says no. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
The Senate Rules Committee recommended confirmation of Harris following a public hearing this morning. Senator Don Harrison was the only member of that committee to vote against confirmation. He said his constituents don't want Harris. The Alabama Education Association's Joe Reed made disparaging remarks regarding Harris's character, saying that when Harris worked for AEA, he encouraged infighting and that he couldn't be trusted. The full Senate rejected Harris's nomination by a vote of 18 to 14. The governor then sent the Senate a message nominating Montgomery Mayor Emory Falmer to the position, a move one senator called childish politics. And Senator Mike Weeks said the governor is just like Alexander the Great, Napoleon, and Hitler. In the last days of their regime, they went crazy. At the urging of the Rules Committee chairman, the governor withdrew Falmer's name. Then he resubmitted Harris's name. Senator Earl Hilliard says the governor's actions will not force the Senate to confirm Harris, but that in fact it may have lost him votes. He says the governor is trying to align support for his own re-election, and he may have thought Harris would provide black votes. But Hilliard says Harris doesn't have the clout the black community needs. The Senate adjourned without voting a second time on the Harris nomination, and Hilliard says the governor will probably spend the weekend jockeying for votes from senators. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News.
To ask for more in a budget. A Senate bill giving Capitol Security officers permanent status under the merit system was given House approval, making its way to the governor's desk for signature. Within minutes, a House bill with several Senate amendments restructuring the Sunset Law also won final approval and will also go to the governor. The governor barely won a victory today as the House briefly balked before approving a resolution giving him until the first week of March to present his proposed budget. The Senate narrowly passed that resolution 16 to 15. Some legislators question whether a simple resolution could extend a deadline established by law, even though the practice is not new. In a news conference late this afternoon, Governor James defended the extension by saying his office needs more time to look over the ramifications of the proposed federal budget as outlined by President Reagan last night. But the governor had some kind comments for Reagan's proposed cuts, saying Reagan's direction is 100% right. Next week, while attending the National Governors Conference in Washington, the governor plans to meet with federal officials about the effects of the proposed federal budget. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
The year is 1864. The 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, was just re-elected for a second term, and we're all in the White House celebrating that victory. There's a feeling of triumph and jubilation, despite the toll the Civil War has taken on everyone's lives. But in reality, you're on AUM's campus, and the man who looks remarkably like Abraham Lincoln is actor Richard Blake, who spoke to his audience in the style and manner of the 16th President. Mr. Lincoln talked about the strain of the Civil War and his hope that the country will soon be reunited with a minimum amount of punishment for those who fought on the Confederate side. But through all his seriousness, Mr. Lincoln made jokes and flirted with the ladies. During the question and answer period, one young man in the audience asked what qualities he would need to become president.
Work hard, be honest, always treat other people like you want them to treat you. Understand everybody, not just your own little group.
During the questions, Richard Blake stayed in character, portraying the 16th President as a jovial, frank individual who definitely used common sense. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
The Air Training Command was led by 6'6" forward Eddie Williams. Fayetteville, North Carolina native poured in 21 points. Most of his time was spent inside, though Williams wasn't afraid to put up the short jumper. Kenneth Jones chipped in 18 for the winners. ATC's Jimmy Lomax wasn't among the scoring leaders, but he was a major factor in the game. His lightning-quick feet and passes a la Magic Johnson helped the Air Training Command to an early 14-point lead. Lomax seemed to get lost in the crowd when he went to the basket, but overall the 5'9" guard fared pretty well against the Academy's big men. David Sawyer led the losers with 18 points. Although his team was never in it, Sawyer put on a mini clinic from the corner. And like Lomax, Sawyer held his own in amongst the Giants. James West hit well from the outside for the Air Force Academy, but the Air Training Command had too much firepower and came away with a 90-62 win. Both teams, however, advanced in the double elimination tournament and runs through Saturday at the Maxwell Gym. The public invited at no charge. Dave Cody, WSFA TV Sports.
Touche Ross & Company spokesman Sam Rhodes says the Energy Adjustment Clause is crucial to Alabama because it enhances consumer awareness of electric costs. Rhodes suggests revisions in the current clause, which he says do not meet all the suggestions of a 1978 Utilities Regulatory Act. He says one of these is to provide incentives for economic and efficient fuel purchase and operation of facilities. Rhodes also says some of the items currently in the energy adjustment charge, such as fuel handling and storage, would be more appropriate in the base rate. Alabama Power Company spokesman Chris Conway says moving those costs to the base rate wouldn't change the consumer's cost. The auditing company emphasizes that an energy clause is the most appropriate for the state, but suggests the power company use a variable clause instead of a partially fixed one it now uses, which recovers a predetermined rate level. Jane Matheson, WSFA TV News.
There was nothing secretive about the Generals' offensive game plan tonight. After all, how do you hide a 6'8" center who's considered one of the top college prospects in the state? George Dixon, Lee's highly touted big man, played brilliantly tonight, scoring 24 of the Generals' 59 points. Jeff Davis had beaten Lee only once in 3 regular season games, and George Dixon was in the stands with a broken hand, and the Generals only lost to the Vols. Give J.D. credit, though. The Vols stayed in it till the end tonight. They rallied from as much as an 8-point deficit in the first half. Al Abernathy, the coach's son, and Lewis Thornton combined for 27 points to pace Jeff Davis. Marvin Humphreys added 11. But the Generals got some easy baskets near the end to pull away, and George Dixon and Mike Freeman hit some crucial free throws in the final minutes to preserve the victory. Willie Williams' basket at the buzzer made it an 8-point game as Lee defeated Jeff Davis 59-51. The Generals remain alive and will meet either Phoenix City or Tuskegee in the region championship Saturday night. Dave Cody, WSFA TV Sports.
At a news conference, Dr. Hubbard called the unearmarking bill an anti-education piece of legislation, saying that it contradicts the governor's call for total unearmarking of all state revenues. He says the bill focuses mainly on the Education Trust Fund, leaving earmarking in selected other areas, which include agriculture, industries, Medicaid, and the Pensions and Security Fund, as well as the General and Highway Department Fund. In calling for an unearmarking of revenues in his State of the State address, Hubbard quotes Governor James as saying the measure would bring fiscal responsibility to the state. But Hubbard says all areas of education in Alabama would suffer and would result in increased class size, short supplies, and restraints in other areas necessary for achieving quality education.
Unearmarking will lead to a situation, we believe, where education funding will be decided in the back offices of the state capitol and then thrust out on the floor, with the present legislators being presented with a catch-22 situation. They can either vote for funding for education that will benefit the entire state, by raising taxes, or they can fund projects that will benefit only the people in their district by pork barreling. And you can bet that education will always come up on the short end of that stick.
Later, Governor James responded to Hubbard's charges.
But that is strictly a hired, paid lobbyist doing what he's hired and paid to do and doing a good job of it.
Hubbard says the reason Governor James wants education unearmarked is so he can put more money into the state prison system, because he says the governor is under pressure from a federal judge to alleviate overcrowding in the prisons. Asked if he thinks the bill will pass in the legislature, Hubbard says no. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.